Okay, so welcome to Module 5. I am your professor, Dr. English Dowdell. This is CIS 222, Advanced Web Design. Now, up to this point in the course, everything that you've built has been front-end development. You created your nonprofit website using HTML, CSS, Bootstrap, and published to GitHub pages. Now, those technologies allow us to build static websites. Now, a static website means that the content on the page never changes unless you manually edit the code. But real websites rarely work that way. Most modern websites generate content dynamically. Think about like the websites that you use every day, like Amazon or Netflix or Instagram or maybe your online banking website. These sites generate different content for different users and they often change over time, based on data or maybe users' actions. Now to do that, we need server-side programming. And that's exactly what we're beginning in this module. Now, in this module, we're going to introduce PHP, one of the most widely used server-side languages for web development. And this is important because PHP is going to become the bridge between your front-end pages and the server-side features that we're going to be building later, including like forms and databases. Okay, so let's quickly review the difference between static and dynamic websites. So a static site is, like I said, what you've been building so far. Static website works like this. The browser is going to request a file from the server, for example, like index.html or about.html or contact.html. And then the server simply sends that file to the browser exactly as it exists. No processing is going to happen. Whereas a dynamic site, however, that's going to work differently. So instead of sending a file directly, the server first runs a script, and that script might generate some kind of content. It might retrieve some data. It might produce forms. Um, or process a form. It may display personalized information, or it may just change output based on conditions. Now, once the script runs, the server then sends the resulting HTML to the browser. Now, the browser never sees the PHP code, it only sees the final output. So, why does PHP require a server? Okay, so like I said before, PHP is a server-side language. It means it runs on a web server, not in the browser. So if you try to open a PHP file on your computer like this, the code's not going to run. PHP must execute on a server that supports PHP. And this is why we're transitioning from our GitHub pages to SiteGround. Now, GitHub Pages is great for static websites, but it doesn't execute PHP. SiteGround is going to allow us to run server-side scripting. So going forward, we'll use GitHub for our version control and code history, but SiteGround is where we're going to actually use for our live server that's going to be running our PHP. So in this module, you're going to learn three foundational PHP skills. First, you're going to learn PHP syntax and basics, okay? That's including like using echo, variables, and conditional logic. Second, you're going to learn how to embed PHP inside of HTML pages. And third, you're going to learn how to deploy PHP to a live server and then test it in the browser. Now, this is the moment your website transitions from static design into dynamic web development. Now, PHP is one of the most widely used server-side scripting languages. It powers systems like WordPress, um, originally Facebook, and other like content management systems. Now, PHP can be embedded directly inside of HTML. It can also output more than just text. PHP can generate like HTML in itself. It can generate images, PDFs, video, and maybe even data responses. Now, PHP also has thousands of built-in libraries, which are a collection of pre-written functions that help developers perform common tasks. So now that we understand the basics of what PHP is and why it needs why it needs a server, let's look at some of the basic structure of a PHP script. Now, a PHP script begins with this less than sign and then the question mark and then PHP, the letters PHP. And then our code would go inside of here, and then it closes with a question mark and then a greater than sign. Now, these tags here, this tells the server to execute this section of the PHP. And then everything outside of those tags is treated as normal HTML. Now, you can place PHP anywhere in your document. I think the best way to understand this is to see it working. So let's create our first PHP file. Okay, so now we're going to create our first PHP script. So you should have received your invitation for SiteGround with the collaborated website that you identified as far as for the subdomain. So there's a couple of ways we could go in to access it. One is once you log in to your SiteGround account, you can click on Manage here, or if you go under Websites under Collaboration, you would see it listed here with your selected subdomain. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that. And what we're going to do is we're going to be using the editor that comes with File Manager. Now, as I think I had placed in the course room, you could use Visual Studio Code, you could use, other text editors that like Sublime that work with PHP. The only thing is that you would actually have to upload your once you work on your file on your computer, then you'd have to upload it into File Manager. Um, SiteGround has a editor that we could actually work directly within the Site Manager, and that's what I'm going to use. And so it allows me to, instantly see what it is I'm working on instead of having to upload. So we would access that through as far as File Manager. Now, before we add PHP to your project site, which is what you're going to eventually be doing, we're going to do something that developers usually do when learning a new language. So we're going to start with a very small test file. And this is going to allow us to focus only on the PHP syntax and confirm that our server is running the code correctly. Um, so what you want to do is we're going to create a new file called greetings.php, and we need to make sure that it's in our public underscore HTML folder. Okay, this is our website root folder, so that when we go to our domain, this is the contents of this folder is what we see. Now, if you, so we'll select that, and if, for instance, you decide you want to work outside of this editor, the way that you upload is this is the functionality for that file upload, and then you would make sure that you have selected the folder that you want to upload to. You can even upload an entire folder, like if you had a special images folder or something like that that you'd have, but your root files like your index file, your about us file, your contact file should be in the root of public HTML. So like I said, we're going to create within public HTML, we're going to create a new page. We're going to create a file called greetings.php. So what we do is with public, make sure public underscore HTML is selected. You're going to click on new file. And here we're going to type in greetings.php. Okay, and then we're gonna, well, let's just say greeting. Okay, so greeting.php, and then we go ahead and hit confirm. Okay, and now we can see that it's that it's here within the public underscore HTML folder. We can either click on it and then click this, select it and then click this edit here, or we can double click and it takes us into an editor. So this is our actual editor where we would be typing the code for greeting.php. So let's go ahead and type in, we're going to start with a very simple PHP script. Okay, so just like an HTML file, we start with doc type HTML. When I type, I like to do my open and my close just so that I keep everything structured. We'll have a head, okay, and we'll have a title in here. Did I hit a space? Title, and we'll just call it PHP greeting, okay. And then we're going to have in a body, of course. Okay, and in the body, this is where we're going to actually put our PHP. So I'll explain this once we get it typed. Okay, so that's like a less than question mark PHP, and then the end tag is question mark, and then greater than sign, and then this is where we would actually type our PHP. Okay. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and save that. Now, the file manager, the editor that comes with SiteGround doesn't automatically save. A lot of times editors will do like an auto save. This one doesn't, so you have to remember to hit as far as the save button. So let's walk through what we actually just wrote. So the page is mostly normal HTML, okay? But inside the body, we opened what we call a PHP block using this code here, okay? That's the beginning tag, and this code is the ending tag. We closed it with that. And like we said before, anything inside of these tags is executed as PHP code. Now the command echo, that outputs text to the browser. Okay, so anytime you want to like output text to the browser, we could use this echo command here. And then one thing I want you to notice is that every PHP statement is going to end with a semicolon. Okay, so now that we've tested it, what we're going to do is we're going to pull up our page. Now, you're going to open your browser and then navigate to the whatever your SiteGround, like this is my SiteGround domain. Okay, so I'm going to navigate to that. So give me a second. Okay, and because of the fact that it was called greeting.php, that's why I had to add on the extension greeting.php. Okay, and if everything works, what you should see is hello from PHP, what was echoed out. Hello. So remember, echo means that we're printing it to the browser, okay? And that's echo from PHP, and that's what we have there. So this confirms that PHP is running on our server. Okay, so now that we know PHP is working on our server, let's make the output a little bit more dynamic. Now, PHP allows us to store information inside variables. What we're doing is really assigning a value, that stored information to that variable. And variables are going to begin with a $sign, as we see here. So in this example, the variable name, the name of the variable is actually name. Okay, so we've got the $sign there, and we're assigning it the value of Jasmine. Okay, and this allows us to be able to use this variable later. Okay, so back to our editor. Okay, so let's modify our code to use a variable. Okay, so here we're going to add a variable name, okay, and then we're going to assign it the value of Jasmine. Okay, and again, don't forget your semicolons. Okay, and then what we want to do is instead of saying hello from PHP, we're going to say hello from, and then what we want to do is we want to include the variable in there. Okay, all right, so let's go ahead and save that. Now the thing is, let me show you something. I may had not have given it enough time. If you happen, I have this in the course room, if you happen to update your code, which we did update our code, but we're not seeing the updated version. Okay, that's because SiteGround will cache your file. Okay, and even though we've changed the file, it's still holding on to the old file. And so what we have to do is periodically, if you find yourself in this situation, you'll have to flush the cache. And so I'm going to show you how to easily do that. So that's under caching. And so I'm going to open that in a new window because what I want to do is I'm going to keep this open so that every time I make a change in this demo, I can just go in here easily and flush my cache. So that would be, again, under speed, caching, click on the dynamic cache. I'm going to click this. This is flush cache. Okay. So now when I come here and refresh, see how now it has the most information. Now, one thing I want to show you real quick before we move on, um, that we've got this greeting that, like I said, is generated from the variable, okay? And we could name this. So the reason why we use variables sometimes, we could change this, say, to something else easily, okay? And then it would actually change here, so we could like give it a new value. And then what happens is the output automatically changes. I'm going to go here and flush. Okay. All right, and see how that changed. Now, one other thing I want to show you, there is a difference in PHP. There's a difference between the double quotes and a single quote. Okay. So I'm going to show you really the difference. Now, the double quote, if we use a double quote, if we want to include, say, the variable name, the variable actually within the string, okay, then just like we did here, then we would have to use the double quote. The double quote is telling us, telling PHP to render whatever's in here. So if there's like a variable that's in here, we want it to render the value of that variable. We don't want to print out $name. We want it to render it as a value. However, if I were to use single quotes, let me show you the difference. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and save that. I'm going to cache that. And see how it printed that. Okay, so single quotes are not going to interpret your your variable. So the only way, like if I did want to say if I wanted to use the single quotes for whatever reason, what I would have to do is I could not include the variable within that single quote. Okay, and so what I would do to create this string is I would do the first part of the string, hello from, put that in a single quote. Then I would use a concatenation. And we use these concatenations to join strings. Okay, some languages use a plus, but in PHP we use a period. Okay, so I'm saying I want to join this string with whatever the value is going to be of this. Okay, so now it's no longer in the quote. Okay, so it's going to render it as PHP, and then I want to join that with, why did I type, with the exclamation point. Okay, so I'm joining three strings or three elements, a string, a variable, and another string, and then that's the single quote. So you see the difference. The double quote is basically when you want to have it like look within the double quote string, and if there's a variable that's in there, it would render that. So let's save that. I just want to show you. Okay, and see how it's rendered it there. Okay. All right, so Again, that's the difference between double. I always kind of stick to the double quotes. Like if you see how when I did the value of the name, but I just wanted to show you there is a difference. Now, PHP contains many built-in functions. A function is basically just a simple piece of code that performs like a specific task. Now, one useful function that you'll be using is the date function. And this function, what it does, it retrieves the current date and time from the server. Okay, so now let's make our page a little bit more dynamic by displaying the current date. So we're going to update our block of code here. So I'm going to go back to this double quote here like we had originally. And what I want to do is I want to have two different lines. I want to have hello from Jasmine, and then I want to have today's date. Okay, so I want to have two different lines. So I'm going to include, you can include some HTML in here because remember, this echo is going to just print this out directly to the browser. Okay, and the browser understands, HTML code. So we would include our HTML code directly within as far as the quotes, okay? So that it can render the HTML code, it can print out the HTML code, okay? But what I'm going to do is I'm going to add another line that says today's date is, okay? And even though I did the double quote, I'm still going to just put my um, my PHP function outside of it and use this concatenation dot to add it. So we're going to be using that date function. So we're going to say date, and then the parameter that we're going to be using is going to format the date. So we're going to have the month, the day, a comma, and then the year. Okay. And again, don't forget your semicolons, and I'll provide, like I said, in the course room, different formatting, how you would like if you wanted to format your date a certain kind of way. Okay, so let's go ahead and save that. Okay, and I want to flush my cache. Okay, so let's refresh, and now we've got today's date is March 7, 2026. So let's break this down. So let's go back here. So again, we've got this new date line here. And again, this tells us how to format our date. Okay. So this tells us, the month, day, and then the year. And then again, the period here in the text that functions as that concatenation operator, joining these two pieces of text together. Okay. So now, PHP is generating dynamic content. Okay. So far we've displayed values, but PHP can also make decisions. Okay. That's where conditional logic comes in. Now, PHP can also make decisions. For example, we can change the greeting based on the time of day, and this is done using if statements. So, an example, we have if and then whatever this condition is. And if this condition is true, then this is the code that gets executed. Okay, notice the syntax, notice the format. We have like curly brackets. So whatever is going to be executed is within that curly brackets. The condition is within a parenthesis. So for example, here we're saying if 5 is greater than 3, okay, that's the condition, then this is what's going to happen if this condition is true. Echo, we're going to print out, have a good day. Now, PHP also supports arrays, which allows us to store multiple values inside of one variable. So an example of that is inside this variable cars, we're storing an array of 3 values: Volvo, BMW, and Toyota. Now, arrays are useful for when working like with list of data. Okay, now there's three types of arrays. There's the index array, the associative array, and the multi-dimensional array. Now we'll use arrays more when we start working with database results later in the course. Now, constants are similar to variables, except their value can't change. They're defined using the define function. So in this example, we use the define function. This is the actual name of the constant, okay? And then this is the value that's being stored in it. And then here we're printing out that the value of that constant. Now, constants are often used in configuration values. Some of the things that I want you to remember, though, by convention, all constants names are uppercase, okay? And they must start with a letter or an underscore. And again, like I said, once a constant is defined, it can't be changed or undefined. Now, so far, we've tested PHP in a simple standalone file. And this allowed us to focus on like the PHP syntax, the echo, the variables, the conditional logic, the dynamic output. But in a real project, we usually don't create an entire site made of tiny test files. Instead, we use these skills inside of our actual website. So now that we know how PHP works, okay, let's implement what we've learned directly inside of our Bootstrap nonprofit homepage. So for your assignment 2, you're going to convert your entire site to PHP. So the steps are simple. Okay, one, you're going to rename all your HTML files to .php. So about, you know, HTML will change to about.php. If you've got contact.html, you're going to change that to contact.php. Then you're going to update all your navigational links. Okay, so if this is your navigation link, say for the About Us page, make sure that you update it so that it can find the new page file extension.php. Then you're going to upload all of your files and your other files to SiteGround. So, if you've got images, you know, in your CSS file, all of that, you're going to upload that to SiteGround. And I do have some information in the course room about that. And then last, you're going to confirm that your site actually loads correctly. So you'll be able to see maybe if you've missed, some files or didn't move some files, or maybe the way that you have some of the files mapped, you may have to change that. Now, just a reminder, even though your site is going to be hosted on SiteGround, you must still keep your project updated in GitHub. So every change that you make should also be committed into GitHub, okay? Push everything, make sure that everything is in your repository. Your GitHub repository should reflect as far as, what's in your SiteGround site. Now, this is going to ensure that your code history is preserved, and it also will allow me to be able to review your work. Okay, so for this module, you have two assignments. Assignment 1 is you're going to create a file called greeting.php that displays a greeting message and the current date and time, very similar to what we've already done here. Okay. The next one is you're going to convert the assignment 2, you're going to convert your nonprofit site to PHP and then add a dynamic PHP block using variables and conditional logic. And then what you're going to submit is going to be your working SiteGround URL and then your GitHub repository link. So this module, it marks an important milestone in this course. You're transitioning from static web design into dynamic web development. Now this is going to serve as a foundation that will carry directly into the forms and the database work that's going to come next. So by the end of this module, you should have written your first PHP script, run PHP code on a live server, and then added dynamic functionality to your nonprofit project. Now, there's some quick reminders that I just want to lay out for you. Make sure, like I say, you update your HTML links to PHP. Okay. Make sure you test your pages on SiteGround, not in GitHub pages. Make sure you upload your files to the correct folders we've talked about in the demo. Check semicolons and quotes. Okay. Confirm that the PHP block is visible, and make sure that you push any update files to GitHub. I don't want to get rid of this. I just want to, I'm going to comment it out just the same as you do in HTML. You comment things out. You want it to be there, but you want to, like maybe you're explaining a script or something like that, or explaining something, or you just want to maybe comment it out so that so it doesn't run. Okay. So in PHP, that's using the 2 slashes there. So I'm going to comment that out. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to hard code, let's say 9, say that the hour is 9. Okay. So I'm feeding the value of 9. And because this is an integer, I don't have to have quotes around it. Okay. I don't need quotes around it. Like I did like with the strings. These are strings. Okay. But this is actually a number, an integer, decimals, and any kind of numeric does not need a quote around it. Okay. So let's go ahead and refresh that. And then I'm going to come here and flush my cache. Okay, now I'm saying that it's 9 o'clock in the morning. Okay, so the hour is 9. And notice that it says good morning. Okay, what said that before? So let's change it to 15. Okay. Let's go ahead and save. I'm going to flush. Okay, so 15 would be what, 3 o'clock? Okay, and see now it says good afternoon. Okay. All right, so let's change it to 20. So that would be like 8 o'clock at night. Let's hit save. Let's refresh. Okay, and see how it says good evening. Okay, so this is a simple example of how PHP can make decisions and generate different content based on those decisions. Now, since we're finished testing, we're gonna take it back to the actual dynamic one. Okay. All right. Now, PHP also supports arrays, which allows us to store multiple values inside of one variable. So an example of that is inside this variable cars, we're storing an array of 3 values: Volvo, BMW, and Toyota. Now, arrays are useful for when working like with list of data. Okay, now there's 3 types of arrays. There's the index array, the associative array, and the multi-dimensional array. Now we'll use arrays more when we start working with database results later in the course. Now, constants are similar to variables, except their value can't change. They're defined using the define function. So in this example, we use the define function. This is the actual name of the constant, okay? And then this is the value that's being stored in it. And then here we're printing out the value of that constant. Now, constants are often used in configuration values. Some of the things that I want you to remember, though, by convention, all constants names are uppercase, okay? And they must start with a letter or an underscore. And again, like I said, once a constant is defined, it can't be changed or undefined. Now, so far, we've tested PHP in a simple standalone file. And this allowed us to focus on like the PHP syntax, the echo, the variables, the conditional logic, the dynamic output. But in a real project, we usually don't create an entire site made of tiny test files. Instead, we use these skills inside of our actual website. So now that we know how PHP works, okay, let's implement what we've learned directly inside of our Bootstrap nonprofit homepage. Okay, so I want you to take a moment, if you hadn't done so, and move your files over to underneath the public HTML on your in your file manager. Okay, so that we're going to start working with those. Okay, so pause the video if you haven't done so, and then pick it up again. So we're going to be working. I only have the one page. You probably have more than that. You may have the About Us page. You may have a contact page. I've just got the one because what I want to do is we're just going to add some PHP, like I said, directly to the home page, which is our index page. Okay. And currently, yours is probably going to be named like my index.html. But in order to enable PHP, we need to rename it. Okay. So if you didn't say rename it when you moved it over, if you're on the editor like me, and it's still got a HTML extension, all you do is just right click on it and you're going to say rename, and we're going to say PHP. Okay. All right. Now, if you go to look at this PHP file, let's go ahead and we're going to double click it and see it's just a bunch of HTML. Okay. Okay, so if you look at this, like say um, in your browser, if you pull it up, it's just going to look the same. Even though we've named it PHP, it's going to look the same. Okay, it's still going to work because PHP files, remember, they can contain normal HTML. Nothing visually has changed. Okay, so let's add some dynamic content. Now you can place this PHP block anywhere on your page that you want, but a common place, because what we're going to do is we're going to create a block of code that has like a welcome message in it. And where I want to place it is I had kind of left this box here available, this container there available here. And so I want to place it there. That's where I want to put it. But you decide where you want to place it. Like I said, you probably want to place it at the top, so visitors can be able to see it. Okay. So we're going to start the way that we do with PHP. Okay. So we're going to be adding a block of PHP code. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a variable called org name. And in the org name, I want you to put what your organization name is. Okay. Now, one thing I want you to kind of notice, I don't think I made note of it, is my variables are one, they don't have spaces. You don't use spaces in variables. Okay. Another thing is I always started with the lowercase, but I use sort of a camel case so that I can be able to look at it and recognize what it is. And you want your variables to be named something that has some kind of context to what they are. Okay, because I can't tell you how many times like I've maybe like programmed something, wrote some script, few weeks later went to pick it back up and I'm trying to figure out, okay, what the heck is this variable representing? Or maybe you're working with a development team, and if you use variables like A, B, C, or X, Y, Z, or whatever the case is, and they have no real context to them, it's going to be confusing. And especially if you have like lines and lines and lines and lines of codes and variables. So I always try to make your variable name sort of, a short version, but at least I can look at this and I can understand this represents my organization's name. Okay, so my organization's name is Helping Hands Foundation. Okay, so I put that in quotes because that's the string that's going to get stored in this variable. And then remember, I want to end my my code, my PHP line, okay, my script line, okay. Then I'm going to give it a slogan, okay. And so again, you can have whatever your slogan is going to be, that it gets stored into this variable. So mine is supporting communities, teas through compassion. I'm just going to keep it short. Okay. All right. So we've got two variables, an org name, a slogan, and again, make sure that it's within that PHP block code so that your browser or your server knows to render this, okay, to execute. This is going to execute the code that's within this code block here. Okay, so we're going to also, I want to have sort of like a welcome greeting, like good morning, good afternoon, good evening, same as we had before. So should have cut and pasted that, but that's okay. So I'm going to say, okay, and then I'm going to have my conditional statement like I had before. Let me scroll a little bit so we can see. Okay, so if the hour is less than 12, then it's going to say good morning. If the hour is greater than 18, then we're going to say greeting is going to be equal to good afternoon. Okay, and then by default, if neither one of those is true, then greeting is equal to good evening. Okay. And again, make sure you have opening and closing brackets, okay? I always do like a click on them just so that I can see where it's opening and where it's closing, okay? So now what we want to do is we're going to echo out a paragraph. I'm going to give it a class of lead. Okay, I've got some CSS. If you don't have that CSS, you can just do a paragraph, okay? You don't have to give it a class. I've got, if you look here, I did include some CSS, and then also remember we're using Bootstrap. So Bootstrap has some built-in CSS, and so lead is one of those. So, and within that, and since I've used a double quote here, okay, I wouldn't do a double quote here because it would think that I'm ending that string of text, and I'm not. So that's the reason why I've got this single quote there. Okay, and then what we want is, because we're using the double quote, we can go ahead and add that variable directly within that string, okay, because we use the double quote. So I want the greeting, and then I want to say welcome to, and then my org name. I'm going to end that paragraph, my double quote, and then my semicolon, okay, and I click on my double quote to see, make sure that I've got the double quote. I'm looking, okay, I just want to make sure I've got opening and closing. Okay, and then the next line is going to be also a paragraph, and it's just going to be, I'm going to have just a slogan in that. Okay. All right, so I'm adding, so I've stored these two values within these variables, and then I'm printing out these variables within sort of my welcome address along with some kind of welcome greeting. So let's go ahead and save that, see how that looks. Need to flush my cache. Okay. All right. Now we can extend this logic even further. We can add a variable maybe for the day of the week. Okay, so I'm going to come under here. Let's add something for the day of the week. So I need to have a variable that's going to pull whatever the day of the week is using that date function. And that's L is going to give us the day of the week. It's going to give us Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, so on and so forth. Okay. And then we're going to add another condition. Okay. We're going to say if day of week is equal to Saturday. Now notice I have two equal signs here. When I'm comparing, okay, this was assigning. Okay, so I'm assigning this to this. One equals fine, but when I'm comparing, okay, in PHP, I need to have two equal signs. Okay, so I want to check to see if it's either Saturday or Sunday, and then I'm going to have a message that represents as far as like the weekend. Okay, now in PHP syntax, the or, we don't say or, okay, we have two pipes. Okay, that's the symbol that's above the slash, the key that's on above the enter key. Okay, so that's how we do or. Okay, the way we do and is just two ampersigns. Okay, but the way we do or is the two pipes there. Okay, and then we're gonna check to see if it's Saturday or if day of week is equal to Sunday. Okay, that's our condition that we want to check, with our with the day of the week. Okay, so if it's either one of those, if either one of these is true, okay, both of them don't have to be true because we said or. Okay, so one of these has to be true. So if one of those is true, then it's going to echo out, and we'll do a class. We'll say text primary. Again, we're pulling some styles from Bootstrap. Okay. Thanks for visiting us this weekend. Okay. Okay. And don't forget that semicolon. Okay. So if that's not true, then we're going to have an else statement. Okay, we're only going to do, unlike this where we had three different conditions or two conditions that we were testing and then a default, we're just going to have this one condition that we're testing. If that condition isn't true, then we're just going to go to the default, which is echoing out class equals. And the reason, again, why I'm not putting, I keep kind of making a mistake and I go back and fix it. I already got a double quote here. Anything inside of here needs to be a single quote. Okay, text. And that's something you can always check if your code doesn't come out right. Check to make sure that your quotes are right. Make sure you've got your semicolons, things like that. Have a great, let's say, have a great day supporting our mission. Okay. So let's see, make sure I've got everything. Okay, let's go ahead and save. Let's flush the cache. Let's refresh, and there it is. Thanks for visiting us this weekend because it is Saturday. Okay. All right, that I'm actually doing this. Now, one other thing I do want to show you is looking here at the bottom. Now, this is something, we always have like the year in the copyright message. And so when we have like a static website or we actually have this as static information, every year we have to change it to like, okay, so next year we'd have to change it to 2027 and then the following year, 2028. But we can also use PHP because remember it's dynamic and it's going to based on whatever the current year is. So we can grab using that date function, we can grab the current year and we can have it so that it dynamically puts the year here and we don't have to ever think about it again. Okay. So let's scroll down to where that is. So we're replacing this 2026 if you've got that in your website. Okay, so basically, I'm going to remember I told you you can put PHP anywhere. Okay, you just have to create the blocks, the string or the tags rather. I'm sorry, um, so that it your browser or your server knows that anything that's between these tags is going to actually be executed. Okay. All right. So what we want to do is it's just going to be something basic. We're just going to echo out the year. Okay. So again, we're going to use that date function. We're just going to pull the year. We don't need a whole date or anything like that. Okay. And then we don't really need the semicolon this time, but I want you to get in the habit of doing a semicolon. When you only have one string, okay, you only have one line of code. It's just by default, it knows that that's one line of code. Normally, when we use a semicolon, it's because we have multiple lines like we had up here. But I just want you to get in the habit, even if it's not necessary, I still want you to get in the habit of putting a semicolon there because I'm going to tell you for a lot of problems with a website, that is the problem. It's like sometimes we forget our semicolons. It's always something small. Okay, it's always something small. Okay, so we replaced the year 2026 with a dynamic, um, using a dynamic string that's using the date function to pull the date. Now you're not going to see any difference because, of course, the year hasn't changed. But if it was 2027, then this will actually change. Okay, so that's something to have on there. Okay, so now we've got a dynamic site. So for your assignment 2, you're going to convert your entire site to PHP. So the steps are simple. Okay, one, you're going to rename all your HTML files to .php. So about, HTML will change to about.php. If you've got contact.html, you're going to change that to contact.php. Then you're going to update all your navigational links. Okay, so if this is your navigation link, say for the About Us page, make sure that you update it so that it can find the new page, file extension .php. Then you're going to upload all of your files and your other files to SiteGround. So, if you've got images, you know, um, in your CSS file, all of that, you're going to upload that to SiteGround. And I do have some information in the course room about that. And then last, you're going to confirm that your site actually loads correctly. So you'll be able to see maybe if you've missed, some files or didn't move some files, or maybe the way that you have some of the files mapped, you may have to change that. Now, just a reminder, even though your site is going to be hosted on SiteGround, you must still keep your project updated in GitHub. So every change that you make should also be committed into GitHub, okay? Push everything, make sure that everything is in your repository. Your GitHub repository should reflect as far as, what's in your SiteGround site. Now, this is going to ensure that your code history is preserved, and it also will allow me to be able to review your work. Okay, so for this module, you have 2 assignments. Assignment 1 is you're going to create a file called greeting.php that displays a greeting message and the current date and time, very similar to what we've already done here. Okay. The next one is you're going to convert the assignment 2, you're going to convert your nonprofit site to PHP and then add a dynamic PHP block using variables and conditional logic. And then what you're going to submit is going to be your working SiteGround URL and then your GitHub repository link. So this module, it marks an important milestone in this course. You're transitioning from static web design into dynamic web development. Now, this is going to serve as a foundation that will carry directly into the forms and the database work that's going to come next. So by the end of this module, you should have written your first PHP script, run PHP code on a live server, and then added dynamic functionality to your nonprofit project. Now, there's some quick reminders that I just want to lay out for you. Make sure, like I say, you update your HTML links to PHP. Okay. Make sure you test your pages on SiteGround, not in GitHub pages. Make sure you upload your files to the correct folders we've talked about in the demo. Check semicolons and quotes. Okay. Confirm that the PHP block is visible, and make sure that you push any update files to GitHub.